Over the years, I always wanted to speak a bit about the suffering. This because, unfortunately, it's a very underrated game. It's one of my favorite horror games, and I have to admit that it did freak me out when I used to play it back in 2004. Yes, I did play the game when it came out. So, what is the suffering? Is a survival horror game. It was mostly, I'm going on a whim here, but it was mostly created to capture the success of Silent Hill 2 and Resident Evil. Although it did something very new with this. The game is more combat based in at least Silent Hill, and you have an ability that lets you transform into a demon. I always find it quite amazing, this ability to transform, because when you do, you don't see very well the character that you are playing with, this demon part, so it's a bit blurred, and it always made me think that is it something in the main character's mind? Is it the fact that he cannot face this demon, or is it something so horrifying that the character himself cannot look at it? So the suffering was developed by Surreal Software. Surreal Software that was founded in 1995 and unfortunately went defunct in 2010. They developed quite a lot of games. Their parent company is Midway Games and Warner Brothers Interactive from 2009 to 2010. Mind you, this is all Wikipedia information. I don't know if it's exactly correct. At some point there is no way to confirm this kind of things. But they did made The Suffering, and they did made the sequel to it, which is The Suffering Ties That Bind. Suffering was still famous. I cannot say that is that underrated, but Suffering Ties That Bind was not famous enough so for them to create another sequel, so it stopped with 2 games, which is a shame because they did something quite nice with Suffering, and with the Suffering 2 they improved, at least in my point of view, they improved what they've done before. I always found it amazing that both games you can play with first and third person views, at least that's what I recall, and that before wasn't that common. Nowadays it's very commonplace that you can switch willy-nilly between camera views, but back then this wasn't as usual as it is now. So this company created other games, and it seems that the most famous of them was Duncan, Order of the Flame, and The Lord of the Rings as well in 2002. It sold quite well, but let's face it, when it came out it was not that hard to sell a Lord of the Rings game. The first movie came out in 2001. If you made a game in 2002 like it was going to sell like hotcakes. Lord of the Rings became extremely famous very quickly, and it was famous already because of the book, but it became far more famous than it would have if it didn't have the movie. Getting off topic here. So what is The Suffering? The Suffering, as I said, is a survival horror. It's one of my favorite games. The plot, it's something that I haven't seen before in the game. As I said, probably Silent Hill had a plot that was as deep as The Suffering, because if you compare to the games back then, what was a game that had a deep plot? Resident Evil certainly wasn't one of them, because the story of Resident Evil was always very simple. It's a company that is making a virus, and you have to stop the company from making that virus. So there isn't too much hidden in the plot here. It's very shallow, unfortunately, and it's very cookie cutter. And I believe that Resident Evil wouldn't have become famous wasn't for the fact that it was one of the first survival horror games in the world. And because Konami didn't make the Silent Hill in many years until now, Resident Evil all over the years they kept going, made a name for itself. That was a Konami's mistake, and that was a win for Capcom. But we cannot trick ourselves. We have to admit and say things as they are. Resident Evil has the same plot as back of a box of cereal. So no plot at all, although it is one of my favorite games, but still I cannot comment its plot. So The Suffering, let's go back. I usually go off track in here, but let's go back to The Suffering. Something that I enjoyed this because if you compare it to Resident Evil and Silent Hill, The Suffering was very open. So you were not stuck in a line. It was not very linear. You could go back and forth in the island because it's all set in an island and it's very open. So it's more of a kind of a sandbox, and you tackle objectives as you go and as you wish. There is a part in the game that even today I remember that I found very heavy, which is the part where you go through a plantation, and while you go through a plantation, you are chased by the ghost of a slaver or a slave hunter. And I always found that part very heavy, and it always got stuck with me, but it wasn't approached in an insensible way. Quite the contrary, they approached this setting very well with a sensibility that it's very uncommon for games, or back then was very uncommon for games to do. Gameplay wise, it was simple but was effective, and although Silent Hill and Resident Evil became far more famous than The Suffering, I also thought the characters in those games were very stiff compared to Talk, which was a more agile and nimble protagonist. Talk could jump, run, fight with both melee and armed combat with ease, and use a vast array of weapons. Surprisingly, he also could roll in order to evade enemies, and I say surprisingly because in the 2000s era, rolling was not really common as it was today. Graphically, the game was nothing to write home about, and I always thought the Xbox version looked a bit crispier than any other platform. This includes PC as well, and albeit simple, they still did an amazing job at conveying horror and gore. Amazingly, while doing this video, I found a few things I wasn't aware of, and the first one is that I always thought I owned Ties That Bind on Steam, and I don't. I cannot honestly say why I even thought that, since the game was never available on Steam. The second thing is that the game is no longer available on GOG. Warner Brothers, the owners of the IP, asked GOG to remove the game from their store not long ago, which means that you'll only be able to play it now if you already own it, or if you have a PS2 or an Xbox. If you don't, that's it, the game is gone. Most people thought it was to bring a remaster, but I really don't believe it. The game is quite underrated, as I said, and I'm pretty sure that Warner Brothers wouldn't even remember that the game exists. Wouldn't be the case of some copyright out of date already. So on the GOG version, didn't run very well. I tried to play Ties That Bind, but he kept asking me for my CD, which never happened. I always managed to play it quite well, and this time he's asking for a CD. The Suffering one plays still out of the box per se, but Ties That Bind doesn't seem to work that well anymore, and I didn't want to go to all the trouble to try and check what was going on with the game. So the third thing that amazed me is that the actor who played Kingpin on Ben Affleck's Daredevil from 2003, the late Michael Clark Duncan,
It's a shame you came here wounded.
gave his voice to Talk and Black more respectively, and his deep baritone voice gave a sense of gravitas to Talk's character.
You're gonna play on my team. You may be tough, but I'm smart. And smart always wins.
Which was very uncommon for that time. Voiceover was not that good, and let's face it, not everything could be Legacy of Kain with their amazing voice acting. But I always liked Michael Clark Duncan, especially in the movie The Green Mile. If I recommend the game, yes, I do recommend the game. Unfortunately, it's not available on Steam. I always wanted to speak about it. I always thought that it's an amazing game, although underrated. But the story, I will not spoil it. I will let you see it for yourself, because the story, as I said, is quite cool and it's very surprising, and I would love to have seen a movie with it. I thought it was a huge loss that was never used for something else. So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, don't forget to click the like button. If you're not subscribed, now it's a good time, and good luck. I'll see you next time.
And you don't even realize it, do you?
That fool tried to play me? Think he's too good for my game? His boy Corey is our ace in the hole. Already hates his dad. We just need to give him a little push. He'll school his old man at his own game.
A fiend of many names. Certainly his moniker, the Colonel, is evocative, but personally, I prefer the name he more commonly uses, Blackmore. More black than what, might I ask? More black than even you? So it would seem.
What happened?
Hold it right there! Oh, Jesus, what did he do to her? I'm gonna be sick. You're gonna get the needle for this one, you sick son of a bitch!